we have been talking about just some of the basics of parenting, and so we're going to continue that today. the The first thing I want to talk about with today's lesson, whatever, is that you are not trying to make them, your child, you're not trying to make your child like you or who you want them to be. Now, let me kind of clarify what I mean there. It's good that you should want them to be responsible, religious, maybe, those kinds of things. Yes, but sometimes we want our kids to be what we want them to be instead of what they are naturally gifted at. Like, let's say, for instance, we have a child who's just super, super artistic, but we want them to be into sports. That's just an example there. Excuse me. But also not trying to make them like you. So, okay, I'm an extrovert, I'm a go-getter, I'm really super hyper, I gotta always be doing something, I do, and so my kid has to act like this, and if they're not like this, then they're wrong. And it's like, well, now hold on. You have to accept your child for where they are while still molding them for what they should be. Is that gonna make sense? Not what you want them to be, not like you, but what they should be. It's like Proverbs talks about training a child in the way that they should go, rather than the way that maybe you went, or maybe rather than all this different stuff. Helping them to achieve their potential, helping them to work, to develop according to who they are. Now, that's going to be different for every child, but it's something that you can't ignore. You have to get to know your child and help them address the things that need addressed in their lives while encouraging the things that are good. Like, once again, maybe you have an artistic child and you wanted an athletic child. Well, okay, but you have an artistic child, so that's how it is. Maybe helping them to learn how to deal with laziness, while also helping them to achieve their potential oh my goodness. So my computer just opened up like 17 internet tabs. Jeez. If my laptop hasn't been restarted in a while, it just starts going crazy. So it's all, let me open all these things. Okay. Well, that's that, I guess. So I think that kind of makes sense there. So you're trying to help them to be who they should be. So this brings me back to something that I've said repeatedly throughout these last couple videos. You're trying to mold them, but you're not trying to dominate them, and you're not trying to take a free hand. So you're not trying to be super permissive, like, oh yeah, the world is your oyster. You can do anything, just don't learn responsibility or money management. Just do whatever you want, and you're your own boss, and all these things. Well, that's not overly helpful for them in the real world. It's going to set them up for a false expectation of how the world works, and then the world will crush them, and they won't have any means of overcoming that. And that's not something that you really want to. That's not something you really want to do to your kids. That's not a way that you want to push them. You don't want to just completely back off. They need to know that there's rules, that there's a structure in place. Kids love those kinds of things. They fight you on it, but ultimately they do a lot better there, and they enjoy it a lot better too. They might not think that they might think that they won't enjoy having structure and rules and those kinds of things, but then they always excel better with rules and structure. But the problem is when there's nothing but rules and structure, which takes us to the dominating. Here's a good example. We give them breakfast, they don't want to eat it, so what do? We try and force it down the throat, and we have this big fight. And then we have them do something else, and see what I mean? We have their whole day planned. You do this, you do this, you do this. You do it in the time frame that I said, how I said to do it. And it's like, people don't do real well when you treat them like a slave. I mean, I don't know how else to say this. And then I see a lot of times parents are kind of lazy, and they have their kids do their jobs for them. Another thing that I see is when parents are super immature, and so they don't take care of stuff, so the kids have to learn how to take care of it. Another thing I see is when parents are insecure And so they look to their kids for identity rather than giving their kids identity. There's a big difference there. So these are all kinds of important things. So, but with all that being said, you want to mold them, but you don't want to take a free hand, and you don't want to over-dominate either. You give your kids decisions, you're raising them up, we talked about this before. But one thing that's important as we're looking at all these different things is don't condone an immoral development as a part of who they are. Well, I'm afraid of, invalidating them as a person, all this stuff. I get that, but at the end of the day, there is still a moral guideline of how one should live their life. Like, let me just give you some examples. If your child, 7-year-old says, "Hey, I want to have sex with this 40-year-old woman," surely you would say, "No, you should not do that." Not only for the physical trauma it would cause your child, and psychological trauma would actually probably right there, that should be a warning indicator of maybe something not really going great in the family unit there. Definitely need to probably start talking to psychiatrists or whatnot. But then also, it's, well, there's a lot of things going on there. Or, if you have an adult child and they're talking about, an attraction for an immature, like a kid, that we wouldn't condone that, would you? If your child says, "Hey, I want to have sex with my dog," or is having sex with their dog, you wouldn't condone that, right? Well, so why do we condone immoral development in other areas? It's like we're afraid, I don't want to offend, I don't want to over-dominate and all these things, but it's like, I get what you're trying to say, I do, but at the end of the day, there has to be some kind of a moral compass of some sort. Just as it's wrong for pedophilia and bestiality, the same is true for a lot of the things that we're doing with gender confusion. The hormone supplements that we're giving to kids, it causes permanent damage. The different sexual surgeries and stuff is causing damage. And not only that, but it's causing damage unnecessarily. Here's the thing. Your kids are going to have times of budding sexuality where things are very confusing. For instance, a large majority of teenagers who say, "I'm gay," within a couple years, no longer identify in that pattern. Why? Because when your sexuality is just blooming, things don't always seem how they are. When you're a teenager, things are kind of confusing, and you're around social media all the time. Nowadays, kids are around social media all the time. And so they don't necessarily understand really everything that's going on, and they don't realize how much it's affecting them as a person. And so nowadays there's a big push towards accepting homosexuality, for instance. So it's a lot more common for kids to say homosexual. Once again, this isn't a permanent state. This lasts for just a couple of years, and then they, snap out of it, for lack of better words. Not to say that everybody who's gay snaps out of it. I'm not saying that. But is it possible? Have we failed to consider that social media might be having an impact on our children? Have we really honestly failed to realize this? And I'm not just talking about religious issues. I'm talking about identity and self-worth issues. Sometimes kids do things for attention. Sometimes kids do things because they feel things that they think is a attraction, but it's actually just a connection. You know what I mean? Like, I have this strong connection with my guy friend. That must mean that we're in love. See what I mean? Because love is kind of not really defined nowadays. And in most people's eyes, love is, hey, let's have sex, or something like that. But love is more about sacrifice. What can I give you? Than more of what can I take from you. And there's just a lot of confusion there. A lot of divorce rates have gone up. Once again, a home life that isn't exactly stable. And these kinds of things have had big impacts on the kids. And I really think, honestly, a lot of people are addressing this in a very stupid fashion. We're coming to our own conclusions about what's right with gender and with homosexuality and stuff, and then we're not paying attention to any of the research, and we're not doing anything to, mold and guide our kids morally. Well, there's something wrong with homosexuality, okay, and so then under that same basis, then there really wouldn't be that much wrong with bestiality either. See what I mean? Like, you can't just pick and choose, this is the confused moral line in my own head, and so now I have to hold my kids to that. It's like, no. No. But, well, anyways, there's just a lot that could be said there. I mean, you can, just from simple anatomy, you can see that the woman's parts were made to go with the man's parts. You can see that anal sex very much so causes a lot of damage, especially in aging. People who go into homosexual relationships oftentimes have a lot of mental issues and trauma. Not mental as in the like retarded, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like issues, like what's the way to say it? Like abuse, that kind of stuff, an unhealthy pattern of development. Either way, not once again, not all the time, but we see a lot of regular occurrences that, for whatever reason, are just kind of being dismissed and ignored. So this gender confusion stuff. Our kids are looking for something stable, and so then we say, no, you can be whatever you want to be. You can't be whatever you want to be. Let's say I want to be a tree. I can't be a tree if I want to be a tree. It doesn't matter how much I want to be a tree. I can't be a tree. If your little boy is a little boy, you can't be a little girl. So then we say, well, what about things that weren't properly formed? A misformed body part doesn't make you something else. It's not like you become some alien or some like unknown entity. You're still either a boy or a girl. It's just that something went wrong with development. I mean, it's nothing to. It's not as big of a deal as it's oftentimes made. That's like, for instance, being born with a cleft lip, or and you might say, well, that's a big difference. Well, not in the essence of what I'm saying. If there's a misformed body part, it's a misformed body part that doesn't make you something else. That's my main point. My whole point. So, as you're trying to help your children and encourage your children and mold your children, make sure not to condone immoral development as a part of who they are. Oh, I think I'm a girl. Why do you think you're a girl, little buddy? Is it because you like sewing? Is it because you like pink? That doesn't make you a girl. Is it because, maybe daddy's too hard on you? See what I mean? There's a lot of things there that are worth discussing. Here's a good example. There was this family who had this little boy, great little boy, and they ended up having a baby where it was a little girl, and the little girl got all the attention, and they didn't really spend adequate time in preparing him for the transition. And then when the baby girl was there, they didn't put forth the time to connect with him either. So then, as she grew up, he started realizing how much more attention she got, being the younger and being a girl, and the only girl. So he tried to start acting like that. And so then the parents said, do we need to think about like gender reassignment? Well, here's the thing. You really need to watch out for making permanent decisions for your children based off of how they feel as a child. Once again, they do change, Now, if we're talking about like a 40-year-old man, hey, that might be a bigger issue. But if we're talking about a 7-year-old kid, I mean, which once again, I wouldn't condone it in a 40-year-old person either. I think that there's some things that are indicators of somebody really needing help when you're suicidal. This is an indicator of really needing help. When you think that you are something that you are not. I was watching a Good Morning America kind of show, I forget what it was called, but there was this kid who said, in every way except physically, I am a wolf. And that he was confused. He was very much so in need of help. But instead of helping, hey, let's publicize this and let's monopolize on this and let's prove our political agenda rather than getting the person the help that they need. And that's just something that is gender issues are oftentimes a problem of an underlying need. Now, I'm not talking about in people who, once again, have misformed parts, and that's a whole different discussion. Really it is. I wish there was an easy answer, but there's not. But what I'm specifically talking about is in our attempt to encourage our children and support our children, we sometimes don't fail to give them an adequate structure of reality. You know what I mean? If a man has sex with a man, it will not establish a child. If a woman has sex with a woman, it will not establish a child. If a man has sex with a dog, it will not establish a child. there's simple anatomy that we can do, that just because something can happen doesn't mean that it should happen. Science doesn't tell us what should happen. It just tells us what, what the regular occurrences are, how it works, that kind of stuff. It's morals that tell us what should and shouldn't happen. So feelings do pass, and it's okay to not be okay. These are things that we should always teach our children, accept them as they are, but still have a moral. And you might say, how do you, those sounds like two different things. Well, who somebody is not the character of someone is not dependent on a moral failing. Does that make sense? Let's say, for instance, someone goes into homosexuality, since we brought it up, since I brought it up. That is a moral issue, oftentimes connected with psychological problems and emotional problems and those kinds of things. Okay, all right. I don't know how else to say this. But that person is... So the life decision, the life choice of homosexuality is not inseparable from that person's character. Does that kind of make sense? So maybe that person is a great mathematician. Maybe that person is great at science or whatever. Maybe they think maybe more logically or something. Maybe they're an introvert. Maybe they like to read books. And those aren't moral issues. That's character. But then the homosexual lifestyle is being blended in with that character, and it's still, those are two separate things. And what we're told all around us is that they're inseparable. It's a part of who I am. No. Your struggle doesn't make you who you are. Like, for instance, let's say I'm married and I am attracted to someone else besides my wife. That's not a part of my character. That is a moral issue separate from my character. And if I choose to be faithful, that will help me to grow and develop more. And if I choose to cheat, that will cause me to change in a more negative sense. Condoning a lifestyle behavior is not the same as supporting a person. And a lot of times what happens is we have to condone the person while still allowing a healthy moral scale. So, with that being said, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay for your kid to feel off. It's okay for those kinds of things. You have to accept them as they are and realize that we're all different. But obviously there should be, let's get some help. Let's work through this. There was one guy that I knew in high school that he didn't really have a father figure. The mom thought it was okay to just sleep around, and it obviously left a lot of hurt in him. And he wasn't ever really a manly man, like the athletic thing. So he had this big confused idea of what does it mean to be a man. He didn't know. So he went into the homosexual lifestyle. And here's what I'm talking about, okay? First off, he started talking differently. His normal voice was like, just talking. But he tried to go all girly with his tone of voice. Now, I'm not trying to make fun of homosexuals. That's not my point. But he was trying to be something because he thought it was a part of who he was. But what it actually was it was a moral decision that was affecting his lifestyle, that was affecting his whole life, that was affecting his mindset, that was affecting his behavior and his character. So, you see what I mean? But there were two different issues. There was an emotional hurt, a psychological issue there that was left untreated, and he got made fun of a lot, which was extremely unfortunate. And so in his search for who am I, what makes me a man, he went to a different way, trying to emulate. Well, I guess that's a discussion for another day too. So he needed help and he didn't get it, and that was obviously a really big issue for him. Sometimes I wish things could be different for a lot of people. But just because some people fail at establishing, a healthy development for their child doesn't mean that you have to, as that's now the natural, normal order of things. oh, marriage is outdated, and all this stuff. And it's like, well, actually, we're seeing a lot of proofs that marriage is really good. Well, if nothing for nothing else, for kids. Anyways, so billings do pass. Not all of them will. Sometimes we struggle with things for our whole life. So the idea here being, well, if they're gay, they're gay. Well, not necessarily, right? If let's say, hypothetically, I'm attracted to children, you wouldn't say that same thing with that, would you? You would say, no, you need to get help. That's not okay, right? We all agree on that, right? Yet with homosexuality, we say something different. Where I thought love is love. So I mean, we have a bunch of these double standards, and kids are getting confused because there is no clear line. We have no moral guidance for ourselves, because if it's something that we're okay with, it's okay. But if it's something that we personally are opposed to, then it's not okay. And so everybody is judging themselves by their own moral standard, but then they're judging other people by their moral standard. So I have to live by my moral standard, but you have to live by my moral standard. It's like, that's not how morals work. Morals can't be turned on and off. This is extremely important as we're talking about raising kids, because as a parent, a large part of parenting is establishing that moral idea, that moral stability for your child. So I think I've talked enough about that. Mold them, don't dominate or freehand, don't condone an immoral development as a part of who they are. You need to have a more clear idea of morals before you can teach your kid morals. And then you need to live by morals before you can possibly teach your kid to live by morals. But, I mean, in typical fashion, we want our kids to be held to a different standard than us. Or we want there to be no standard for our kids because we were held to too high of a standard or whatever. If your son likes girly colors, girly activities, girly things, don't be too concerned. Keep dressing him like a boy, and dress your girls like girls. And a lot of those things will just work out as you spend time with them, you interact with them, you show them love. Unconditional love. That means that even if they don't do what you want, you still love them. Kids can definitely tell when you have love with attachments, So parent what your kids need. Let me say this differently. Oftentimes, as parents, we try and parent in the way that we wish that our parents did. Or we try to parent exactly like our parents did. That's not going to work for many different reasons. First off, your kids are not you. Second off, if your standard is your parents rather than being a good parent, it's going to be more of a competition. I've got to be better than my father. No, you don't have to be better than your father. You have to do the best job you can in what you think is right to help your children. Yeah. Oh, well, my dad did this, and so I need to do that. Well, maybe, but your kids aren't you, once again, so you do have to allow for that change of character. We live in a different world now than you did when you were a kid. They're a different person than you were. They have different needs than you did. And if all you do in parenting is reactionary, well, my parents did this and I hated that, so I'm going to do this for my kids. You're really not thinking about your child. You're thinking about your own revenge, your own insecurity. And that's more of an issue that you need to grow up more than you need to project that on your kids. So parent what your child actually needs. Not as your parents did, not as you wish that they did, but what's right for your child. I mean, I think that's fairly simple. You have to really get to know each one of your children, and you have to treat them differently in a sense. You should have the same standard as far as, disciplinary measures and those kinds of things. Don't have favorites, but also don't have favorites in a different way. Well, this one I connect with really easy, but this one I don't. So put forth the energy and effort to connect with them. See what I mean? I'm not talking about discipline here. I'm talking about connecting with your child. Oftentimes we think, okay, well, I'm good at music. well, this child's good at music, so we're going to have something to talk about. We're going to be able to connect. And I'm not going to put forth any effort to connect to that child. I'll support them. I'll love them. And in your child's eyes, that's favoritism, because you are connecting with that one and they are not getting that. Or we try to do the same thing, like, hey, I took this child out for a camping trip. We had a great time. Now I'm going to take this one out for a camping trip. Well, maybe that might work, might be a good idea, but it also might be a good idea to find something that you could more connect with that one. Let's say, for instance, they're not an outdoors person. So, anyways, and then the last thing that I want to mention. Don't attack your child in a way that makes them question their identity. For instance, you have a daughter, and so she does something. You're worthless. I mean, you're attacking the essence of who they are. Even when they do a poor job on something, you can maybe not necessarily be critical of the thing, but not be accepting of a poor, inferior job. Like, for instance, you ask your kid to fold the laundry. You come back, and half of it's folded real sloppy, and the other half isn't. You don't have to say, you are so irresponsible, you did a terrible job at this. You don't have to say it like that. You can say it something more along the lines of this. That's not... When we do something, we do it the best that we can. And this job is not... how would you say that? Off the top of my head, it's harder to say it off the top of your head than... I mean, I do this stuff all day with my kids. I just can't remember how I do it now that I'm on the spot. Just give me a minute. God, just kidding. So instead of focusing on the child, focus on the job. So like if they did a good job, for instance. Wow, that looks great. Not... wow, you're such a good boy for doing that. Did you see the difference? Because now their worth, their value is only as it's attributed to a thing. Not that they have value in and of themselves. But they have earned value because of a job, which means they can also lose value. That makes a kid feel very insecure. And if they do a bad job, okay, here's a good example. Every time I ask you to do something, you never listen. You always do a bad job. See, I'm attacking. Okay, now notice this, okay? Son, I asked you to fold the laundry, and not only have you not finished what I have asked you to do, but you didn't fold it how I taught you. Let's try again. That kind of makes sense? Maybe one thing you could do is maybe unfold them, have them try over again. Do it with them. Once again, I'll do, you watch. I'll do, you help. You do, I'll help. You do, I watch. Maybe you're giving them too much responsibility at one time. Maybe you could ease them into it, like maybe fold all the shirts, for instance. Maybe they just have a short attention span, in which case you need to consider their age. You need to consider, if you're being too busy, maybe make it less of a task and more of a kind of learning opportunity. And there's lots of different things you could do. Don't attack your boys for being weak. Oh, you're such a baby, and that kind of stuff. Don't question their identity. Don't attack them in a way that makes them question their identity. When they don't do a poor job, you don't have to sugarcoat it. Hey, I asked you to clean your room. You know what I mean? You can still address the issue, but do it in a way that they still have your respect and you still treat them with dignity. You know what I mean? Here's something that I just did today, okay? It was a rough morning for two of my kids. One of them got sent to their bed just because they were acting tired. And, weren't listening, kept doing stuff, lying about stuff, that kind of stuff. So I sent them to their bed to take a nap because I was like, it's obvious that they're tired. So then this other one I asked to clean, they finished eating, so I told them to clean up their mess. They put crumbs all over the floor. So I said, okay, well now you have to clean up your mess. So, after 10 minutes, she still hadn't done it. So I said, okay, I asked you to do something and you didn't listen. So now you have to pay for someone else to do it. So I called the one that was in bed, and I said, Freya, my one kid, you have to pay for someone else to do it. And then I said to my other one, I said, will you clean up her mess and she'll pay you for it? And she said yes. And I said, okay, so you don't have any money. What you have to pay her with is with a nap time. You have to go to bed for her because she has to go to bed. I said it clearer than I'm saying it now. Okay, so don't think that this is how I said it. So you had to take her nap for her, and you have to clean her mess for her. And so this, okay, all right. So she went onto her bed, and she took a nap, and then the other one cleaned up the mess, and it worked. So the idea of you are responsible for cleaning up your own mess. And then when she didn't, it wasn't, I'm going to yell at you, I'm going to beat you, I'm going to nag you to death, I'm going to do it for you. None of those things were acceptable. You made a mess, you have to clean it up. She wasn't willing to do it herself, so she had to pay for someone else. Because she didn't have money, she had to do it in service. Well, the other one was having to take a nap. So instead, she took her nap for her, and she cleaned up her mess. So it worked for everybody. There were no spankings necessary. Now you might say, oh, well, hold on. Rome wasn't built in a day. I'm trying to teach my kids how to be responsible and accountable and that kind of stuff. Now, yes, I can try for immediate results. My kids will never lie again. My kids will always clean up their mess as soon as I tell them, okay, all right. But in the meantime, kids are kids. So I don't want them to try and do stuff behind my back and to not trust me and to give them a poor example of how men treat women. I would much rather teach them the consequences of their actions. When you make a mess, you have to clean it. If you don't clean it, you have to pay someone else to clean it. Either way, the mess has to be cleaned up. See what I mean? And so I was able to have a teaching moment because I stayed calm. I talked to my kids calm. I'll give you another story, okay? That I think was one of those few times in my parenting career that was really, I did a great job. You're going to have some times as a parent that you're really ashamed of what you did. You're going to have some times when you're just super proud of what you did. And this was a good example of a time that I was really, really proud of what I did. This might be the best thing that I ever did as a parent. So I wake up, it's like 5 in the morning, and there's this big something going on in the bathroom. I'm like, what's going on? At that time, my oldest was only like 3, I guess. And so I only had 2 or 3 kids at that time. And so the second one was only like, I don't know, a year and a half, I guess. It's really hard to remember. I just remember there were 2 of them making a big mess. So I walk in, and what had happened was they had taken toys into the bedroom, filled them up with water, and it was leaking all over the floor. There was a huge mess of soap and water in the bathroom, on the floors, and the toys, everywhere. And one of them had peed their pants, and there was just this big mess. And it's one of those things where it's very irritating. You wake up to and a lot of times what parents do is they instantly freak out. And